The history of Christianity concerns the Christian religion, Christendom, and the Church with its various denominations. For the 1st century to the present, Christianity emerged in the Levant in the mid-1st century AD. Christianity spread initially from Jerusalem throughout the Near East, into places such as Aram, Assyria, Mesopotamia, Phoenicia, Asia Minor, Jordan and Egypt. In the 4th century it was successively adopted as the state religion by Armenia in 301, Georgia in 319, the Aksumite Empire in 325, and the Roman Empire in 380. After the Council of Ephesus in 431, the Nestorian schism created the Church of the East. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 further divided Christianity into Oriental Orthodoxy and Chalcedonian Christianity. Chalcedonian Christianity divided into the Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church in the Great Schism of 1054. The Protestant Reformation, which began in the 1500s, created new Christian communities that separated from the Roman Catholic Church and have evolved into many different denominations. Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christianity spread to all of Europe in the Middle Ages. Christianity expanded throughout the world during Europe's age of exploration from the Renaissance onwards, becoming the world's largest religion. Today there are more than 2 billion Christians worldwide. Early Christianity. During its early history, Christianity grew from a 1st-century Jewish following to a religion that existed across the entire Greco-Roman world and beyond. Early Christianity may be divided into 2 distinct phases: the apostolic period, when the first apostles were alive and led the church, and the post-apostolic period, when an early episcopal structure developed, and persecution was periodically intense. The Roman persecution of Christians ended in AD 313 when Constantine the Great decreed tolerance for the religion. He then called the First Council of Nicaea in AD 325, beginning of the period of the first 7 ecumenical councils. Apostolic Church. The Apostolic Church was the community led by the apostles, and to some degree, Jesus' relatives. In his Great Commission, the resurrected Jesus commanded that his teachings be spread to all the world. While the historical reliability of the Acts of the Apostles is disputed by critics, the Acts of the Apostles is the major primary source of information for this period. Acts gives a history of the Church from this commission in 1 to 3-11 to the spread of the religion among the Gentiles and the Eastern Mediterranean by Paul and others. The first Christians were essentially all ethnically Jewish proselytes. In other words, Jesus preached to the Jewish people and called from them his first disciples. See for example Matthew chapter 10. However, the Great Commission is specifically directed at all nations, and an early difficulty arose concerning the matter of Gentile converts as to whether they had to become Jewish as part of becoming Christian. Circumcision in particular was considered repulsive by Greeks and Hellenists, while circumcision advocates were labeled Judaizers. See Jewish background to the circumcision controversy for details. The actions of Peter at the conversion of Cornelius the centurion seem to indicate that circumcision and food laws did not apply to Gentiles, and this was agreed to at the Apostolic Council of Jerusalem. Related issues are still debated today. The doctrines of the apostles brought the early church into conflict with some Jewish religious authorities. This eventually led to their expulsion from the synagogues, according to one theory of the Council of Jamnia. Acts records the martyrdom of the Christian leaders, Stephen and James of Zebedee. Thus, Christianity acquired an identity distinct from Rabbinic Judaism, but this distinction was not recognized all at once by the Roman Empire. See Split of early Christianity and Judaism for details. The name Christian was first applied to the disciples in Antioch, as recorded in Acts chapter 11 verse 26. Some contend that the term Christian was first coined as a derogatory term, meaning little Christs, and was meant as a mockery, a term of derision for those that followed the teachings of Jesus. Early Christian beliefs and creeds. The sources for the beliefs of the apostolic community include the Gospels and New Testament epistles. The very earliest accounts of belief are contained in these texts, such as early creeds and hymns, as well as accounts of the Passion, the empty tomb, and resurrection appearances. Some of these are dated to the 30s or 40s CE, originating within the Jerusalem Church. According to a tradition recorded by Eusebius and Epiphanius, the Jerusalem Church fled to Pella at the outbreak of the Great Jewish Revolt. Flight to Pella. Post-Apostolic Church. The post-apostolic period concerns the time after the death of the apostles until persecutions ended with the legalization of Christian worship under emperors Constantine the Great and Licinius. Persecutions. According to the New Testament, Christians were subject to various persecutions from the beginning. This involved even death for Christians such as Stephen and James, son of Zebedee. Larger-scale persecutions followed at the hands of the authorities of the Roman Empire, beginning with the year 64, when, as reported by the Roman historian Tacitus, the Emperor Nero blamed them for that year's Great Fire of Rome. According to church tradition, it was under Nero's persecution that Peter and Paul were each martyred in Rome. Similarly, several of the New Testament writings mention persecutions and stress endurance through them. Early Christians suffered sporadic persecutions as the result of local pagan populations putting pressure on the imperial authorities to take action against the Christians in their midst, who were thought to bring misfortune by the refusal to honor the gods. The last and most severe persecution organized by the imperial authorities was the Diocletianic persecution, 303 to 311. Reasons for the spread of Christianity. In spite of these at times intense persecutions, the Christian religion continued its spread throughout the Mediterranean basin. There is no agreement on an explanation of how Christianity managed to spread so successfully prior to the Edict of Milan and the establishment of Christianity as the state religion of the Roman Empire. In The Rise of Christianity, Rodney Stark argues that Christianity triumphed over paganism chiefly because it improved the lives of its adherents in various ways. Another factor was the way in which Christianity combined its promise of a general resurrection of the dead with the traditional Greek belief that true immortality depended on the survival of the body, with Christianity adding practical explanations of how this was going to actually happen at the end of the world. For Mosheim, the rapid progression of Christianity was explained by two factors: translations of the New Testament and the apologies composed in defense of Christianity. Edward Gibbon, in his The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, discusses the topic in considerable detail in his famous chapter 15, summarizing the historical causes of the early success of Christianity as follows: the inflexible and, if we may use the expression, the intolerant zeal of the Christians derived, it is true, from the Jewish religion, but purified from the narrow and unsocial spirit which, instead of inviting, had deterred the Gentiles from embracing the law of Moses. The doctrine of a future life, improved by every additional circumstance which could give weight and efficacy to that important truth. The miraculous powers ascribed to the primitive church. the pure and austere morals of the Christians, the union and discipline of the Christian Republic, which gradually formed an independent and increasing state in the heart of the Roman Empire, structure and the episcopacy. In the post-apostolic church, bishops emerged as overseers of urban Christian populations, and a hierarchy of clergy gradually took on the form of episcopos and presbyters, and then deacons. But this emerged slowly and at different times for different locations. Clement, a 1st-century bishop of Rome, refers to the leaders of the Corinthian church in his epistle to Corinthians as bishops and presbyters interchangeably. The New Testament writers also use the terms overseer and elders interchangeably and as synonyms. Post-apostolic bishops of importance include Polycarp of Smyrna, Clement of Rome, and Ignatius of Antioch. These men reportedly knew and studied under the apostles personally and therefore called apostolic fathers. Each Christian community also had presbyters, as was the case with Jewish communities, who were also ordained and assisted the bishop. As Christianity spread, especially in rural areas, the presbyters exercised more responsibilities and took distinctive shape as priests. Lastly, deacons also performed certain duties, such as tending to the poor and sick. In the 2nd century, an episcopal structure becomes more visible, and in that century this structure was supported by teaching on apostolic succession, where a bishop becomes the spiritual successor of the previous bishop in a line tracing back to the apostles themselves. The diversity of early Christianity can be documented from the New Testament record itself. The Book of Acts admits conflicts between Hebrews and Hellenists, and Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, and Aramaic speakers and Greek speakers. The letters of Paul, Peter, John, and Jude all testify to intra-church conflicts over both leadership and theology. In a response to the Gnostic teaching, Irenaeus created the first document describing what is now called apostolic succession. Early Christian writings. As Christianity spread, it acquired certain members from well-educated circles of the Hellenistic world. They sometimes became bishops, but not always. They produced two sorts of works, theological and apologetic, the latter being works aimed at defending the faith by using reason to refute arguments against the veracity of Christianity. These authors are known as the Church Fathers, and study of them is called patristics. Notable early fathers include Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus of Lyons, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen of Alexandria. Early Christian art only emerged relatively late, and the first known Christian images emerge from about 200 AD, though there is some literary evidence that small domestic images were used earlier. The oldest known Christian paintings are from the Roman catacombs, dated to about AD 200, and the oldest Christian sculptures are from sarcophagi, dating to the beginning of the 3rd century. Although many Hellenized Jews seem, as at the Jura Europos synagogue, to have had images of religious figures, the traditional Mosaic prohibition of graven images no doubt retained some effect, although never proclaimed by theologians. This early rejection of images, and the necessity to hide Christian practice from persecution, leaves us with few archaeological records regarding early Christianity and its evolution. Early heresies. The New Testament itself speaks of the importance of maintaining correct doctrine and refuting heresies, showing the antiquity of the concern. Because of the biblical prescription against false prophets, Christianity has always been occupied with the orthodox interpretation of the faith. Indeed, one of the main roles of the bishops in the early church was to determine and retain important correct beliefs. and refute contrarian opinions, known as heresies, as there were sometimes differing opinions among the bishops on new questions. Defining orthodoxy would occupy the Church for some time. The earliest controversies were often Christological in nature, that is, they were related to Jesus's divinity and humanity. Docetism held that Jesus's humanity was merely an illusion, thus denying the incarnation. Arianism held that Jesus, while not merely mortal, was not eternally divine and was, therefore, of lesser status than the Father. Trinitarianism held that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit were all strictly one being with three hypostases of persons. Many groups held dualistic beliefs, maintaining that reality was composed into two radically opposing parts: matter, seen as evil, and spirit, seen as good. Such views gave rise to some theology of the Incarnation that were declared heresies. Most scholars agree that the Bible teaches that both the material and the spiritual worlds were created by God and were therefore both good. The development of doctrine, the position of orthodoxy, and the relationship between the various opinions is a matter of continuing academic debate. Since most Christians today subscribe to the doctrines established by the Nicene Creed, modern Christian theologians tend to regard the early debates as a unified orthodox position against a minority of heretics. Other scholars, drawing upon distinctions between Jewish Christians, Pauline Christianity, and other groups such as Marcionites, argue that early Christianity was always fragmented, with contemporaneous competing beliefs. Biblical canon. The biblical canon is the set of books Christians regard as divinely inspired and thus constituting the Christian Bible. Though the early Church used the Old Testament according to the canon of the Septuagint, the Apostles did not otherwise leave a defined set of new scriptures. Instead, the New Testament developed over time. The writings attributed to the Apostles circulated amongst the earliest Christian communities. The Pauline epistles were circulating in collected form by the end of the 1st century AD. Justin Martyr, in the early 2nd century, mentions the memoirs of the Apostles, which Christians called Gospels, and which were regarded as on par with the Old Testament, which was written in narrative form where, in the biblical story, God is the protagonist, Satan of the antagonists, and God's people of the agonists. A four-gospel canon was in place by the time of Irenaeus, c. 160, who refers to it directly. By the early 3rd century, Origen of Alexandria may have been using the same 27 books as in the modern New Testament, though there were still disputes over the canonicity of Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, 2 and 3 John, and Revelation. Such works that were sometimes spoken against were called antilegomena. In contrast, the major writings and most of what is now the New Testament were homologumena, or universally acknowledged for a long time, since the middle of the 2nd century or before. Likewise, the Muratorian fragment shows that by 200 there existed a set of Christian writings similar to the current New Testament. In his Easter letter of 367, Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, gave the earliest preserved list of exactly the books that would become the New Testament canon. The African Synod of Hippo, in 393, approved the New Testament as it stands today, together with the Septuagint books, a decision that was repeated by councils of Carthage in 397 and 419. These councils were under the authority of St. Augustine, who regarded the canon as already closed. Likewise, Damasus's commissioning of the Latin Vulgate edition of the Bible, c. 383, was instrumental in the fixation of the canon in the West. In 405, Pope Innocent I sent a list of the sacred books to Exuperius, a Gallic bishop. When these bishops and councils spoke on the matter, however, they were not defining something new, but instead were ratifying what had already become the mind of the Church. Thus, by the 4th century, there existed unanimity in the West concerning the New Testament canon, and by the 5th century the East, with a few exceptions, had come to accept the Book of Revelation and thus had come into harmony on the matter of the canon. Nonetheless, a full dogmatic articulation of the canon was not made until the 1546 Council of Trent for Roman Catholicism, the 1563 39 Articles for the Church of England, the 1647 Westminster Confession of Faith for Calvinism, and the 1672 Synod of Jerusalem for Greek Orthodoxy.